He would hold the fuel in his mouth and spit it into a flame, causing a massive fireball. But this time, he accidentally swallowed some of the liquid. As he brought the flame to his lips, he burped, and the fire ignited the vapors, traveling down his throat and into his stomach. This triggered a huge explosion. The crowd erupted in applause, thinking it was part of the act. But they soon realized he had been blown to pieces as body parts rained down, and his head was later found in the popcorn machine. They set up a baby monitor to keep an eye on their daughter, because recently they had noticed open drawers and crooked window blinds, things that made them uneasy. The camera was a way to make sure nothing odd was happening. Hours later, in the middle of the night, the monitor crackled awake, instantly jolting her from sleep. She glanced at the screen and saw her husband standing over the crib, cradling their baby. She felt relieved until she realized her husband was lying right next to her. Panic surged as she grabbed a baseball bat and bolted into the nursery. She turned on the light, and her husband spun around, startled, clutching their baby. If this was her husband, then who was in her bed? They set up If you try to swallow a huge piece of food, your body will attempt to force it out by coughing. But if it's too big, it causes a total blockage in your throat, and no air can get through. Without oxygen, you can lose consciousness within minutes. But if you swallow something like a pen cap, the opening will allow for some air to pass through. It'll still be difficult to breathe, so have someone perform the Heimlich maneuver until the force pushes out the object. He illegally entered the cockpit of an empty plane and took to the skies. He was a baggage handler for the airline and had no formal pilot training. Air traffic controllers were told the plane was stolen and contacted him over the radio. For over an hour, he performed daring stunts, including barrel rolls, while air traffic controllers pleaded with him to land safely. Eventually, he crashed the plane on a remote island to avoid hurting any innocent people. He illegally entered the cockpit. The dog was placed in a sack attached to the side of a car, and it would just hang above the road with its head sticking out. The bottom of the sack was clamped to the step along the side of the car, and the top was hooked to an open window. But car accidents usually meant the dog was toast. As he reached for his money, a note slipped through claiming that someone was trapped inside. News outlets ran with the story, reporting that a man was somehow stuck in the ATM. The story spread like wildfire, with many speculating if it was even possible for someone to fit in such a tiny space. When police arrived, they did find the man, but he was actually trapped in a maintenance room behind the ATM, not in the machine itself. He went in to repair it when the door got stuck behind him, and with no phone to call for help, he wrote notes and slipped them through the receipt slot. They implanted a microphone in its ear, a transmitter in its skull, and a wire in its fur. Then they spent years training the cat to listen to human conversations. The sound would be transmitted through the wire and picked up by spies waiting nearby. When it was finally ready for its mission, they released it near a Soviet embassy, hoping to eavesdrop. But just moments later, it was run over by a taxi, putting an end to the $20 million operation. He slipped in the snow and broke his neck, but even though he screamed for help, no one was around to hear him. He laid in freezing conditions, wearing only his pajamas, but his dog heard his cries and laid on top of him to keep him warm. She licked his face to keep him awake and barked for help, and she did this for almost 24 hours straight. A neighbor finally heard and found the man, barely alive, and he ended up surviving thanks to his dog's devotion. He slipped. Steel spikes shoot out from the front of the police car's bumper once it reaches a fleeing vehicle. This pole goes under the vehicle, and it drives into the spikes. Instantly, they puncture the rubber and create small controlled holes. These slowly deflate it instead of causing a dangerous blowout. And within seconds, the fleeing car loses control, forcing the suspect to stop. The baby drops down the sewer pipe, getting stuck in the tight space, and rescuers spent 2 hours carefully cutting him out. When they did, they realized that the afterbirth was still attached, meaning he had only just been born. At first, they thought he was abandoned and soon found bloody tissues in a woman's apartment. But she explained she was on the toilet when she suddenly gave birth, and the baby just fell down the pipe. The vat was filled with a strange greasy substance, along with human bones and a gold ring. Now, the owner told the police that his wife had run away, but when they searched the basement of his sausage factory, they discovered that he had boiled her body in caustic chemicals and dissolved nearly all of her remains. People believed that he had been planning to turn the rest of her into sausage. He was immediately taken to court where he was sentenced to life in prison. The vat. Use a needle to gently trace along the edges, weakening the outline. If you get a simple shape, you can snap the outside off to save time. But with complex shapes, it's safer to lick the back of the candy, leaving a thick layer of spit. You see, your saliva softens the sugar and dissolves the edges, making it easier to carve. And you can also use a lighter to heat the needle and melt the candy faster. As they pierced her ear, the gun caused micro cracks in the cartilage, which allowed bacteria to survive. 3 weeks later, her ear was swollen, red, and leaking pus. Doctors found that a bacterial infection had eaten away part of her cartilage. She became resistant to antibiotics, forcing surgeons to drain the wound and perform reconstructive surgery. Experts warn piercing guns are often unsanitary, and hollow needles are much safer. As they pierced her, when a firing squad shoots a prisoner, one of the bullets actually isn't real. You see, one of the rifles is loaded with a blank, but it still fires and kicks back when the trigger is pulled. The soldiers aren't told which rifle it is, casting doubt on who actually shot and killed the man. This way, the soldiers can feel less guilty and sleep at night, knowing there was a chance that they weren't the one to kill him. When a firing squad shoots, he tried to light his shoe on fire mid-flight, but the attendants smelled the burning matches and saw what he was doing. Passengers and crew wrestled him to the ground, and eventually he was sedated. And when they checked his shoes, they discovered a fuse sticking out of each one. It turned out they were stuffed with enough explosives to bring down the entire plane. And that's why you have to take off your shoes at the airport. Sick people ride this roller coaster that will climb over 1,500 feet. Next, it plummets at over 200 miles an hour before going through 7 shrinking loops. And this creates enough force to make the riders black out immediately. It cuts off the oxygen to their brains, and after 60 seconds, this will kill them. Now, this ride was designed for terminally ill patients, giving them the option of a fun death. But only a scale model was ever built. Sick people, he milked the venom from the snake before injecting it into his veins. But it was such a small amount that he was unharmed, and this allowed him to build up antibodies. Over the next 20 years, he did this 700 times, injecting more and more venom. And eventually, he built up a tolerance. He's now been bitten over 200 times by some of the world's most deadly snakes, and he survived each one. Eventually, his blood could be used to create a universal antivenom, saving people from all kinds of snake bites. If you pulled out someone's spine, could you use it like a whip? Well, human spines are made of many small bones, making them flexible. And when swung hard, these bones can hit with enough force to cut into your skin. Now, sharpening the bones would make it act like a serrated blade, slicing even more into flesh. And if you covered it with metal, it could be turned into a deadly flail, smashing anything in its way. They smashed her head into the cake, but didn't realize there were wooden sticks inside holding it together, and one pierced her eyelid, getting stuck in her eye socket. Blood poured from the wound as she screamed in pain. She was rushed to the hospital where the stick was carefully removed, but if it had been just an inch to the right, she would have gone blind. If you get trapped underwater, your body will eventually use the last of the oxygen in your blood. But after about a minute, your chest tightens, and the gasp reflex forces you to inhale. Water rushes into your lungs, choking you instantly. Your body thrashes, trying to reach the surface, but within seconds, your brain starts shutting down. Then your body stops fighting, and you'll feel at peace as you black out. And after just a few minutes without air, your brain suffers severe damage, until you eventually dissolve into the deep, your body weightless in the abyss. The tank flew across the room, striking the boy in the head. You see, he was undergoing an MRI scan after a surgery, but during the procedure, a staff member accidentally brought a metal oxygen tank into the room. And when the machine was turned on, its massive magnet pulled the tank into the chamber where the boy was laying. And despite medical attention, he passed away 2 days later. If you lit a cigarette on a spaceship, it would form a round blue flame, and it would just hover in place, feeding off whatever air was around it. If there was enough oxygen, the flame could suddenly flare up, spreading out in every direction. It would move in a slow, creeping sphere, sticking to surfaces and igniting them. Eventually, the fire could latch onto walls and air ducts, and in an enclosed spacecraft, it could become deadly in seconds. If you lit she slammed into him, and he flew through her windshield, but she was drunk, and instead of calling for help, she drove home with him still stuck in the glass. Once she was in her garage, she apologized, only to leave him there for 2 more days as he bled out. When he finally died, she and her friends stuffed his corpse into a car trunk and dumped it in the park. But after she bragged about it at a party, police discovered her crime. If you tilt your bow as you shoot, the arrow will bend slightly once released. And if you do this at just the right angle, it pushes the arrow off course. As it moves through the air, the bend keeps pulling it to the side, and it will actually curve around the target instead of hitting it. Then, as the bend evens out, the arrow's path becomes straight, allowing you to shoot around objects. He was fixing the pin setter when it suddenly activated. The machine moved down as if to set up the bowling pins, but the man was still underneath, and the weight of it crushed him instantly. With no one around to hear his cries, he was left to suffer from his injuries, and his body was found the next morning, still stuck in the bowling lane. If the seatbelt is around your pregnant belly and you get into a crash, it can transfer the force directly into your stomach. And this can cause the entire placenta to rip off completely, leaving your baby without a way to breathe. Now, you might think skipping the belt altogether might be safer, but even a sudden stop can throw your body forward, crushing your belly against the steering wheel. So instead, place it below your belly and across your hips. This spreads the force of the crash over your body, saving you and your baby's life.